Have you ever heard the silent scream? No, not the kind of quiet you find in a library or in the middle of the night in an empty house. I'm talking about the silence on a battlefield, that deafening emptiness that comes after the roar of artillery and the chatter of machine guns suddenly stops. It was June 6, 1944, D-Day. We, the boys of the 4th Infantry Division, were supposed to land on a stretch of beach that went down in history as Utah. They told us it was going to be the easiest sector of all 5. A walk in the park, Lieutenant Miller had smirked, clapping us on the shoulder before we boarded the Higgins boats. But even the easiest walk in hell is still hell. When the ramp of our boat dropped, the world exploded. The water was boiling with bullets, and the air was thick and heavy with smoke and the smell of cordite. We jumped into the chest-deep, freezing water, and I watched boys fall next to me before they'd even taken a single step on French soil. Their faces, full of grit and youthful fire just a minute before, were now empty masks, staring up at the gray Normandy sky. We got luckier than the boys on Omaha. The currents and the smoke had thrown our coxswains off course, and we landed about a mile south of our target. We learned later that it was a blessing. The resistance here was lighter, the German defenses not as strong. But lighter is a relative term. The machine gun nests the Germans called pillboxes were spitting death from the dunes, and mortar shells were turning the beach into a moonscape. We ran, we dropped, we got up, and we ran again. The only thought was to get to the low seawall that offered some semblance of cover. My friends were falling all around me. Billy Young, a kid from Ohio I'd gone through basic with, collapsed into the water without a sound. Frank Sinatra, our radio man, no relation to the singer, took a round to the radio on his back. It saved his life, but he was down on the sand, stunned and helpless. We broke through. We made it across the surf, across the sand littered with anti-tank obstacles. And there it was, the seawall. Behind it, we could catch our breath, regroup. Lieutenant Miller, pale but resolute, was shouting orders, trying to be heard over the din of battle. Our objective was to push inland to the causeway, to cut off the German retreat and stop them from reinforcing the other beaches. We moved out, fighting for every inch of that cursed French soil. We advanced through flooded fields and hedgerows the locals called bocage. Those damn hedgerows were a nightmare. Thick, tall, they were perfect cover for German machine gun crews. Every intersection, every bend in the path could be your last. The fight turned into a series of short, brutal firefights. We moved from cover to cover, pouring lead into the thickets where we heard the rip of an MG-42, a weapon our guys called Hitler's buzzsaw, for its insane rate of fire. I was firing my trusty M1 Garand, and every time it ejected an empty clip with that distinctive ping, my heart would stop for a fraction of a second. That sound was music to the enemy's ears, a signal that an American was reloading. In that moment, you were vulnerable. I'd learned to reload fast, almost by instinct, without taking my eyes off the enemy. By noon, we reached a small farmhouse. The stone walls of the house and barn looked like a solid fortress. But it was a trap. As soon as we moved into the open ground in front of it, machine guns opened up from the attic and windows. We hit the dirt, hugging the ground as if trying to melt into it. Bullets whizzed over our heads, kicking up little fountains of mud. We returned fire, but the Germans had the better position. They had us pinned down, and we were taking casualties. I saw Corporal Davis, our machine gunner, try to set up his Browning, only to have a bullet punch right through his helmet. We were caught. To retreat meant running through a crossfire. To charge was suicide. Lieutenant Miller yelled that we had to flank the farmhouse, but to do that, someone had to suppress those machine guns, to give the others a chance to move. We were in a furious firefight. I was firing blind, just spraying rounds toward the windows where the muzzle flashes bloomed. I went through clip after clip, the ping of empty en-blocs becoming more and more frequent. I reached into my ammo pouch for the last one. 8 rounds, just 8 rounds, stood between me and being completely defenseless. I fired all 8 shots. My Garand clicked open, ejecting the final clip. In the lull that followed, the sound was like a death knell. I slapped the pouches on my belt, hoping for a miracle. But there are no miracles in war. Empty. I was unarmed in the middle of a battlefield. Private Henderson was lying next to me, his eyes staring lifelessly at the sky. A little farther on, 2 more of our guys. They'd never see another sunset over Kansas or Texas. And in that moment, as the roar of the battle briefly subsided, I heard that screaming silence. It was the cry of despair, of fear, of being utterly alone. The Germans kept firing. A bullet slammed into the dirt next to my head, showering me with earth. And that's when a crazy, desperate idea formed in my mind. If I couldn't fight, I had to disappear. I had to become one of them, one of the men already lying on this field. I squeezed my eyes shut, rolled onto my back with my arms flung out, and went perfectly still, playing dead among the fallen. To lie motionless when every muscle in your body is screaming with tension is torture. To lie motionless while death is flying all around you and your brain is melting from terror is something beyond human comprehension. For the first few seconds, which stretched into an eternity, I just lay there, pressed into the earth with my eyes shut, listening to my heart pound. It was beating so loud, I was sure the Germans in their machine gun nest could hear it. "Breathe, Riley, breathe," I told myself. "Dead men don't breathe this fast." I forced myself to slow my breathing, taking shallow, almost imperceptible breaths. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, damp earth, and something else. A sweet, sickening smell I tried not to think about. I was on my side, my knees slightly bent, mimicking the unnatural posture of a man cut down in battle. My helmet was askew, its rim digging painfully into my temple. I didn't dare fix it. Any movement could be my last. Time lost all meaning. It became a sequence of sounds. I heard the rip of the MG-42 from the attic, dry and sharp, like someone tearing a giant sheet of canvas. I heard the answering, deeper and more deliberate shots of our Garands and the short bursts from a Browning automatic rifle somewhere to my left. That meant my guys were still alive, still in the fight. The thought gave me a sliver of hope. They were fighting, and I was lying here, as useless as a spent shell casing. A wave of shame burned through me, but I pushed it down. Panic is your greatest enemy. It will kill you faster than any bullet. I started to remember my training back at camp. Sergeant O'Malley, an Irishman with a face like an old leather boot, used to drill it into our heads. A soldier fights with his head, not just his rifle. If you're out of ammo, the fight ain't over. It just means the next phase has begun. Back then, his words sounded like empty bluster. Now, they were my lifeline. I risked cracking one eye open. Just a sliver. The world was a blurry, sideways mess. I saw heavy gray clouds, wisps of black smoke, and the tops of trees trembling in the wind. Right in front of me, just a few feet away, lay Henderson's body. His rifle was beside him, but I knew it was just as empty as mine. I forced myself to look away. I couldn't look at him. Not now. I had to focus. I started to analyze the sounds. The second machine gun, the one firing from the ground floor, was to the right. Its bursts were shorter. It was probably covering the approach to the door. I could hear German voices, short, guttural phrases, They were calm, confident in their fortified position. Every now and then, between bursts, I heard laughter. They were laughing. The thought ignited a cold fury in me. They were laughing at the death of my friends. My gaze shifted. I could see the corner of the stone barn. It stood slightly apart from the farmhouse. There was a narrow gap between the house and the barn, and I noticed something critical. The machine gun in the attic couldn't cover the space directly beneath the wall of the house, and the gun on the ground floor seemed to be aimed at the field in front, where the main body of my platoon was pinned down. That meant the house had a blind spot, a small patch of ground their bullets couldn't reach. If I could get there, but then what? What could I do with my bare hands? And then I remembered. On my belt, besides the empty ammo pouches, hung something else. 2 Mark II grenades, 2 pineapples, 2 wrinkled cast-iron bringers of death, each weighing just over a pound. My heart started beating faster, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the birth of a plan. The plan was insane, suicidal, but it was the only chance we had. I had to crawl to that blind spot, about 30 feet of open, bullet-swept ground, 30 feet that separated me from probable death and my only chance to strike back. I had to wait for the moment the Germans' attention was diverted, wait for my guys to make them duck their heads. I lay there, listening to the rhythm of the battle, trying to feel its pulse. A shot from our sniper somewhere far off, a long burst from the attic in response. A short pause, the chatter of machine guns again. It was a dance of death, and I had to find my moment to cut in. And then the moment came. I heard the distinct thump of our 60mm mortar. A few seconds later, a shell whistled overhead and exploded somewhere behind the house. The Germans went quiet for an instant. Then our Browning opened up, a long, furious burst raking the attic window. That was my chance. I didn't think. I moved on pure instinct. I bent my legs and pushed off, slithering through the wet grass and mud like a snake. I wasn't crawling on my hands and knees. That would have been too high a profile. I wriggled, keeping my entire body flat against the earth, using my elbows and the toes of my boots, inch by agonizing inch. My lungs burned for air, and my muscles screamed from the strain. I didn't dare raise my head. All I saw were clumps of dirt, blades of grass crushed by boot treads, and the horrifying still face of Henderson as I crawled past him. I whispered, "Sorry, pal," and kept moving. It felt like an eternity before my outstretched hand touched the cold, rough stones of the farmhouse foundation. I gave one last desperate push and tumbled into the life-saving shadow. I was in the blind spot. For a few seconds I just lay there, gasping for air, my body trembling from the exertion. I pressed my back against the wall and slowly, very slowly, got to my knees. The window where the ground floor machine gunner was firing from was right above me. I could hear their voices as clearly as if they were standing next to me. One of them was humming a tune, the other cursed. The belt must have jammed. I carefully unhooked one of the grenades from my belt. Its grooved surface was cool and solid in my hand. I gripped it in my right hand and found the pin with my left. My finger slipped easily through the ring. Everything now depended on a single throw, on accuracy and luck. I glanced out at my guys in the field. They were still laying down fire, keeping the enemy distracted, giving me this precious chance. I was their only hope. I straightened the cotter pin, holding the safety lever down tight. The mechanism was live. All I had to do was let go. I took a deep breath, squeezed my eyes shut, and got ready to make some history. Time froze. The moment I released the safety lever, the world narrowed to me, the heavy grenade in my hand, and the dark rectangle of the window above my head. The spring-loaded striker snapped, and I heard the soft fizz of the fuse igniting. 4 seconds. 4 heartbeats until detonation. I had no time for second thoughts, no time for fear, no second chances. I rose to one knee, my body moving faster than my brain could issue commands. It was pure drilled-in muscle memory. My arm made a practiced, powerful motion, not a long baseball pitcher's wind-up, but a short, sharp flick from the shoulder, sending the grenade in a low arc. I wasn't aiming for the window itself. I was aiming for the stone wall just below it, intending to bank the pineapple off the wall and have it bounce inside, giving the Germans no chance to throw it back out. I heard the dull, wet smack of the grenade against the stonework, followed by a clatter on the wooden windowsill. I immediately dropped to the ground, covering my head with my arms and pressing myself into the foundation as hard as I could. The explosion, when it came, wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a deafening roar that splits your eardrums, but a muffled, guttural cough from within the enclosed space of the room. It was as if a giant beast had coughed up fire and steel. A cloud of gray-black smoke billowed out of the window, followed by a shower of glass and something else I didn't want to look at. And then I heard screams. Not war cries, but shrieks of pain and surprise that were quickly choked off. The machine gun on the ground floor went silent, but Hitler's buzzsaw from the attic didn't stop. If anything, it began firing with renewed fury, spraying lead across the field in front of the house. The gunner upstairs obviously knew they'd been flanked, and was now trying to keep my guys from raising their heads. The job was only half done. I still had 1 grenade left. But how could I get it up to the attic? Throwing it up there from the ground was impossible. I had to get inside. A wooden door was just a few yards away, still in the blind spot. I scrambled over to it, keeping my back to the wall. I grabbed the cold iron handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. I slammed my useless rifle butt against it, but the old wood only groaned. Then I saw something I should have noticed earlier, a result of my own explosion. The doorframe was slightly twisted, and a crack had formed near the lock. I threw my shoulder against the door. Once, twice. With a loud crack, the rotten wood gave way, and I stumbled inside. It was dim and chaotic within. The air was thick with dust, and the acrid smell of cordite. 2 Germans in field gray uniforms were on the floor. A third was sitting against the wall, clutching his head, his face a mask of pain and bewilderment. The mangled MG-42 lay on its side, its barrel bent at an unnatural angle. My throw had been perfect. The grenade had gone off right at their feet. I had no time for pity or satisfaction. I was a soldier with a job to do. I stepped over the bodies and rushed for the ladder leading to the attic. It was rickety and creaked with every step. Each sound echoed in the tense quiet of the house. The machine gun upstairs was still firing, and that was my cover. I reached the top of the ladder and peered into the opening. The gunner was lying on the floor, firing out of a low attic window. His number 2 was beside him, feeding the ammo belt. They were so focused on the battle that they never heard me approach. I unhooked my second grenade. This time, it was simpler. I pulled the pin, counted 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, under my breath, and just tossed the grenade into the far corner of the attic. I didn't wait for the explosion. I scrambled back down the ladder, covering my head. Another muffled blast, the splintering of wood, and a cry that was cut short, and then silence. The same deafening silence I started this story with, but this time it was different. This wasn't the silence of a lull in the fighting. This was the silence of victory. I slowly got to my feet. My hands were shaking. I walked over to one of the dead Germans on the ground floor. Lying next to him was an MP-40 submachine gun. I had never held a German weapon before, but right then, it looked like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Foreign, angular, but loaded and ready to fight. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. I stepped outside the house, holding the gun at the ready. I looked out at the field. My guys were still pinned down, afraid to lift their heads. They didn't know the threat was gone, so I raised the MP-40 into the air and fired a short burst. The sound was unfamiliar, sharp, nothing like our rifles. But it was a signal. The first man to get up was Lieutenant Miller. He looked at the house, then at me. I raised a hand, signaling all clear, and then they started to rise, one by one, tired, filthy, but alive. They moved toward the house, and I could see a mixture of disbelief, amazement, and relief on their faces. The lieutenant walked up to me. He looked at the shattered door, at me holding the German submachine gun, and just said, "Riley, what the hell?" I couldn't manage a single word. I just nodded. He put a hand on my shoulder, and in that simple gesture, there was more gratitude than any medal could ever convey. That farmhouse wasn't just a pile of rocks. It was a key strong point that had an entire sector pinned down, preventing our advance to the causeway. By taking it, we opened the way for the whole battalion. We saved dozens, maybe hundreds, of the lives of the men coming up behind us. My act, born of desperation and the simple will to survive, had become the small key that helped unlock a very large door. Later, as we sat behind that stone wall, sharing cigarettes and what was left of our K-rations, I thought about that day, about the screaming silence, and I realized it hadn't gone away. It had just changed its tune. Now it was the silence of a duty fulfilled, a silence bought at a steep price. The lives of Henderson, Billy Young, and so many other boys who were left lying on that beach and in those fields. I wasn't a coward for playing dead. I became a weapon, waiting for its moment to strike. That day, I died so that my platoon could live and move forward. And that silence, the silence of their memory, is something I carry in my heart to this very day.